As we continue on talking about creating and managing users and computers, specifically we talked about adding them and managing them through ADUC, we're now going to look at configuring account access. And remember, we have user and computer accounts, and we have the typical tools to manage these accounts of ADUC as well as PowerShell. But in addition to that, we have Group Policy Management Console, which is GPMC, and if we're working with computer accounts specifically, we have what's called djoin.exe, which is a command line utility. Now, when people hear rights and they hear permissions, there's often some confusion. So I want to clear that up right here. Permissions give you the ability or provide you the ability to access something. I want you to be able to print to this printer, or I want you to be able to access this file share. That is a permission. User right is the assignment of a user-oriented task or a management task. A user-oriented task would be something like logging on locally or changing the system time, where a management task would be something like managing our printers. These rights can be assigned using GPMC. We can assign the right directly to a user, or we can assign the right to a group of users, and all users added to that group will have the right to perform that task. When working with user access, we have some specific PowerShell commands that we can use, for instance, to reset the password of a user account. We're going to use set-AD account password. And remember, I showed you we could have an account expire after 90 days. We can actually modify that expiration date by using the set-AD account expiration PowerShell commandlet. When we're working with unlocking, enabling, and disabling accounts, we can use the unlock-AD account, the enable-AD account, and the disable-AD account respectively. And as always, I want to remind you we can use the rename AD object and the move AD object to change the name of an object in Active Directory or to move an object from one container to another container in Active Directory. Most often when a computer is going to join a domain, the domain controller is going to be online and available so that computer can join the domain, but that may not be the case if I have a remote connection that is not consistently connected to that domain controller. So what we can do is use what's called offline domain join. It requires the use of Windows Server 2016 on the server side, and it requires the client to be running Windows 7 or higher. So it's a four-step process to join the domain when doing so. So the first thing you're going to do is go to your domain controller, and you're going to open up an elevated command prompt, and you're going to run this djoin.exe command, /provision, /domain, and then supply the name of the domain that you're working with, and then /machine, and provide the name of the client machine. And you're going to save this out to a metadata blob file, or I think a nicer way to say that is a configuration file. And in this case here, it's going to be cl1.txt. We're going to copy that file from the DC to the target computer, and then on the client machine, you're going to use the djoin.exe again, /request odj, /load file, and specify the location of that txt file that contains that configuration information, and then /Windows path, and then the system root. In this case here is /Windows, and then you'll end this command with the /localOS for the local operating system. After that completes, you're going to restart that computer, and that client becomes part of the domain using the configuration file instead of actually connecting to the domain controller during the actual join to a domain. So we're going to wrap up this sub-lesson by going back out to ADUC and look at different configuration options for managing the user's access. So we're back into our number one domain controller. We're going to go into ADUC, of course, and we're going to look at a couple of configuration options for our users. We'll pick on Don, and we'll right-click, and notice we have an option in here to add them to a group. We could enable or disable our account. So this is a toggle. If the account is disabled, it would show enabled, and if the account's enabled, it'll show disabled. So this is a disabled account right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click enabled. It's been enabled, and then I'll go back and I'll right click again. Notice now it toggled to disabled. I can also go in here and reset Don's password here. I can move this account to another container or an organizational unit, and then I can go to properties, which is another way for us to get to all of these tabs that we already looked at. So that's how I can manage that inside of ADUC. And I've been thinking about it. I haven't really shown you anything in PowerShell. You probably think I don't even know how to spell PowerShell. So I'm going to change that. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to click here and I'm going to go into Windows PowerShell. And let's see. I want to make sure you know how to test to make sure you're connected to a domain. So I'm just going to type in get-add domain. And it's going to come back and give me a bunch of information. And here are the LDEP addresses for this. Here's the computers, and then if we go down here, here's the DNS root is azmtp.pearson.com. We have a domain controller's OU. So notice the computer, it just uses the CM, which is the common name, but it specifically indicates that the domain controller's container is an OU. But if we go back to the tools here, if I can find my way around here, and I go back to ADUC, you'll see that the domain controllers has that little extra icon on it, so that's indicating it is in fact an OU versus the others that aren't an OU. Just want to point that back out to you for a second here. Now let's do something else. I can't remember where we left off. So let's go back to tools and ADUC one more time, because I can't remember if Don's enabled or disabled. I was just kind of toggling it and go to, so he's enabled because the option's disabled. So minimize this, and the first thing is to clear the screen, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then we're going to type in the disable command. So we're going to disable -AD, ACCOUNT. And then we're going to do -identity. That identifies the objects inside of AD. And done. So notice the command light is proper because it's yellow, and then the parameter is proper because it's kind of a grayish, and then the value. So we'll go ahead and execute that. So I've disabled this account. So now when I go back to ADUC, it should be at the enable status. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's jump back to here, and we'll right click on Don, and sure enough, it's back to enable. So I can manage my objects using PowerShell or ADUC, and the change is immediate. So I can jump between the two as I'm working with my objects in AD if I want to do that. Now, I didn't talk much about rights in here because rights are managed using group policies, and we're going to see group policies in just a little while. So we'll talk more about what you can do with rights and how you manage rights when we get into our discussion on group policies. But you should now be comfortable with configuring user access using both PowerShell and ADUC.